In today's video, we're going to talk about the recent immense growth that real-world assets have seen on Arbitrum, and by the end of the video, you'll know why I think people are underestimating how high this growth will be able to go over the next couple of months. So without further ado, let's talk real-world assets. So over the weekend, I was on RWA.xyz, which is a real-world asset website that shows off all the assets that have been tokenized amongst different blockchains within crypto. I actually published a picture, as you can see here on X, that ended up going viral, funny enough, saying how Arbitrum now has the highest amount of tokenized assets, or RWAs, in all of crypto. Now, if you rank it by distributed RWA value, Arbitrum stands right now as number 6 with about $753 million in RWAs. Obviously, these numbers that we'll look over through this video will vary a little bit because each website uses different ways to measure tokenized assets. And in this case, if you measure it by RWA count, you can see that Arbitrum now has over 1,700 different real-world assets, with Ethereum and Solana following right behind it. And if you look closely, you can see a lot of the classics like Circle, Paxos, USDAI that I've made a video about recently, and a ton of different protocols that are responsible for a lot of this tokenization growth. However, if you look closely, you'll see that Robinhood is actually representing a lion's share of those new tokenized assets that are now pushing Arbitrum to the top of that leaderboard of all RWAs being tokenized within crypto. The nice part is that even though it counts for most of the tokenized assets, Spyco and Securitize, as well as this newer one called Pleasing Gold, also accounts for most of the value rather than the assets themselves. And this is something that I think we're going to start to see as Arbitrum continues to grow within its real-world asset journey, is that the real-world asset environment on Arbitrum will not be dominated by one or two players. What we'll end up seeing is different companies coming into the Arbitrum ecosystem and adding assets, adding value to those assets, and obviously depending on what they're utilizing Arbitrum for, we'll start to see different primitives being built with them. So in Robinhood's case, they're currently using Arbitrum for the minting and the burning of their stock tokens, mainly for their app within the EU. And then if you scroll down here, down to the stable coins and the different assets, you can see PayPal USD, this is new, now is the top third biggest asset on Arbitrum by value, which if you're following me on Twitter, you've probably seen that the market cap of it on Arbitrum has grown an immense amount, mainly due to their partnership with USDAI that I talked about in another video on the same channel. So make sure to check that out if you haven't already. Now, in general, if you look at all the assets that are tokenized on Arbitrum, you can see that the market cap is roughly $800 million, with roughly around 1,600 tokenized assets that currently exist on the chain. Now, this is what I was saying earlier, that some of the metrics that you might see may vary a little bit, because for example, if you go at this next dashboard, you'll see that Robinhood actually has close to 2,000 tokenized assets, which is a stark difference from what RWA.xyz listed earlier, which I think was around 1,500. So that's the one thing to take away from this video so far, is that different platforms have different ways of measuring these tokenized assets, like I mentioned earlier. So obviously you want to make sure you're doing your research and looking at all the different platforms when you are, deciding, which chains have the most assets, why they have the most assets, what the dashboard in question is actually counting, and what they aren't counting. Spyco and Exodus, as well as Pleasing Gold, account for the top 3 in terms of value tokenized assets within Arbitrum. And Pleasing Gold just launched not too long ago. That's why you can see the market cap, the delta, 30 days actually up about 10%. And if you look at some of the charts down here, you can see that there's a huge spike in real-world asset creation on Arbitrum and is now settling down a little bit, roughly right around the $800 million mark, as I said earlier. Now let's talk about why I think people are severely underestimating the immense growth that I think Arbitrum will see in terms of RWAs over the next couple of months. Number one is, very simply put, Robinhood is going to be launching their own Arbitrum chain later on this year, which should allow for the composability of their stock tokens, not only on Arbitrum 1, but also on their own chain as well. Now, obviously, they have to confirm all the details of what will actually happen when that goes live, but Vlad has already spoken about in different earnings calls and even online that the goal is to democratize access of stock tokens to anyone, anywhere. Right now, it's only available for customers within the EU and other jurisdictions. Now, if they were to switch on stock tokens for the US app, as well as maybe other jurisdictions that they're already in, then you can only imagine the amount of stock tokens that will be not only being minted on Arbitrum as a platform, but also just the amount of people that'll be using it within DeFi. Again, think lending, borrowing, perps, stuff like that. I've already made a video actually about the early days of Robinhood's testnet, so make sure to watch that. People are already building apps where you can lend and borrow like Tesla stock, AMD, and stuff like that. The possibilities are endless, and so will the opportunities, so that's why I expect it to be immense, and I don't think people really understand that. And the second catalyst, or I guess reason why I think people are really underestimating how high RWAs on Arbitrum can go, is the introduction of newer teams and projects on Arbitrum. As I mentioned earlier, Pleasing Gold is one of the most recent ones. PayPal's PYUSD is also now making a proper entrance into Arbitrum with USDAI. And I think the point here is that, teams like these expand to Arbitrum and grow their nest here because they know Arbitrum is a neutral environment and because of how much liquidity flows in and flows out of it every day because of perps, because of DeFi, lending and borrowing, etc. Assuming liquidity is one of the important factors that teams are looking for when they're deploying RWAs, which, newsflash, it is, then deploying on Arbitrum is kind of a no-brainer for most of these teams. And the other nice thing that I think most people don't mention is that Arbitrum is not going to compete with teams that launch. For example, a lot of other big chains do have exchanges that back them, they have investment arms that back specific teams, and of course, they also sometimes just launch their own derivatives of tokenized assets that already exist. So the one thing that most people can rely on for Arbitrum is that it'll be very neutral in its approach of how teams can succeed. As in, you don't need to be part of an Arbitrum exchange to have a priority or anything like that, because none of those exist. And you can know that the Arbitrum ecosystem will support what you're building, assuming the execution, the go-to-market, and the product is there. With all that being said, what do you guys think? Are you bullish on RWAs, tokenization, all that stuff, especially as it relates to Arbitrum? Let me know in the comments below. I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace out.